Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And some of you may have spotted that I took to my community tab over on YouTube to ask you for some questions that you would like to see me answer. And I got a really quick response with numerous replies, so thank you all. I am going to answer as many questions as possible here now, but if you miss this call for questions, never fear, because I am definitely up for doing this kind of video again. But before we look at those questions, I want to say a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning platform that hosts thousands of classes from people willing to share their skills so that you can develop yours. I am really keen to find ways to ensure that the content I create on social media is as good as possible and getting better all the time. Skillshare offers so many classes on film and video creation that I couldn't wait to join. Whatever you're looking to learn, there are so many classes to choose from that you are sure to find something to take your fancy. As some of you may know, I have been playing around with TikTok for a few months now, and I have been really enjoying myself. But with that being said, I did feel like I was always playing catch-up, and I definitely have the sense that I've been doing things the long way round, so to speak. Lucky for me, I spotted Julia Marzulli's class on TikTok hacks, so now I have a bunch of useful techniques to try out. Skillshare is a creative and inspiring community. Skillshare is the place to keep you learning. With a Skillshare membership, you can access their ever-growing list of premium classes to explore whenever suits you. Skillshare is also ad-free, so you can stay in the zone while you're exploring new skills. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description box or my code will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. And now, let's jump into those questions. I'm going to respond to these in the order that they appeared for me on YouTube. Also, just so you're aware, I have conflated some of these questions that I felt were asking similar things. First up, didn't people of the Tudor era believe that King Arthur was an historical figure? If Arthur Tudor had lived, would he have been called Arthur II? This is a great question, and I can definitely see why you've asked it, and there is certainly a lot of logic behind it. But I don't think he would have been Arthur II, and this is why. The Arthur that precedes Arthur, who would be Arthur II, comes before the Norman conquest. And if we look at how they are numbering kings, so for example, let's take a look at Edward the Confessor. He is a famous king, he's a sainted king, he's someone that is venerated in the Tudor period. However, he is not Edward I. Edward I is a completely different king, one who comes after the Norman conquest. So my suggestion would be that as that is the numbering situation, Arthur Tudor, had he lived and become king, would have been Arthur I. But what do you think? Question 2. You've talked about many different misconceptions/assumptions people have about the past in videos. If you could teach the whole world one thing to get rid of some area of historical ignorance, what would it be? You asked me to say one thing, but I am going to give you two, because, hey, it's my channel and my video, so I can. First of all, I think it's really important that we remember that we aren't done when it comes to understanding history, that new information is coming to light all the time. Things that were thought lost are being found. There is amazing technology that is digging things out of texts that were once invisible. So we aren't finished with history. It's not a closed shop. And the understanding that I have now about certain events, I can't say this is how things happened. I can say to the best of my understanding, or my interpretation of this event is such and such. But if we're going to be good historians, if we're going to be value-adding historians, then to my mind, we have to always go, but that assessment might change. And I'm always willing to have my assessment changed. And that's one of the things that I love the most about history. The second thing that I think is a massive misconception, and actually, to be honest, a lie that the people who do history tell themselves the most, is that they are approaching history without bias. That their particular lived experience or their politics doesn't come into it at all. And that is, well, it's often the thing, isn't it? That the biggest lies are the ones that you tell to yourself. And that's something that I think that all historians have to honestly confront. That we aren't working in a personality vacuum. That all of us are bringing our own stuff to the people and things and times and events that we are engaging with. And I think if we can all be honest about that, we will just do history better. Which character or occurrence in history would you like to see on the screen that you think hasn't been done yet, or it has but didn't do it justice? There are lots of ideas that are springing to my mind having seen that question. I think the one that's jumping to the top is there being a film or TV series about Mary Queen of Scots where it sticks to the historical timeline, where Elizabeth I isn't effectively a co-lead and as important as Mary Queen of Scots, and where we actually get the sense of the rigours of her decades of imprisonment, because I haven't seen anybody really do that justice. And I've seen some people and some versions completely just gloss over it, and you've got some 20-something heading off to her execution, which doesn't make sense in the historical timeline. I understand why people avoid the imprisonment bit because it feels like it would be monotonous. But I think a talented director, screenwriter, whatever, would be able to tell that story without it being boring for an audience. So that's something that I would like to see. If you'd asked me this a few months ago, I would have gone, well, Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr needs her own film. But she's getting one, isn't she? She's getting Firebrand, or at least it's the marriage of Henry VIII and Catherine Parr. I think that Catherine Parr is the focus, as it's called Firebrand. I'm really interested to see what they do with it, and I will let you know what I think when it comes out and I see it. And finally, there are loads more, but the other one that's jumping up to the forefront of my mind is let's have a Bess of Hardwick movie. Let's put Bess on screen just by herself, because I definitely think that she could hold it. After becoming a mother yourself, did your views on historical women change in any way? And if so, how? So this is actually a really tricky question. And that's because I said in a previous answer that your lived experiences absolutely change the way you engage with historical events and people. However, I don't like the idea that to understand, for example, the grief of a mother who loses a child, somebody needs to be a mother. I understood, I empathised with that utter horror long before I was even thinking about becoming a mother. So I don't think it's had that effect. I do think that some things that were only hypotheses for me have become realised, actualised, and I now viscerally feel them to be the case. Motherhood physically changes you on a cellular level, and it also changes you mentally. So the problem is that I also can't quite remember how I saw things in what I call the before times. So I don't know if I always understood this in the visceral way that I do now, or if motherhood has made it visceral. Because there is definitely something when you are solely responsible for another human being, whether you gave birth to them, whether you are their biological father, or whether you're their caregiver, the vulnerability of that person, it alters the way you engage with the world. It certainly did for me. I can only speak from my own experience of motherhood and my desire to advocate for my child's safety, needs, wants, whatever else. And also the fact that something that I perhaps didn't realise quite so much before I became a mother is how involuntary that actually is. You can almost not quite control stepping in. There are times where I am, because we're trying to allow Gabriel to figure out the world, and I have to sit on my hands and I have to bite my tongue and not intervene so that he can have that kind of risky play experience. So that is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, how involuntary your response to your child is. And on the flip side, and connected to that, is how I've become very aware of how fully capable I might be of doing almost anything to protect that baby. But what I will also say is that I'm at the coalface of early parenting. My son is just becoming verbal, so he can't really express what he needs. So I have to essentially feel his feelings for him. So I think as I move through the seasons of parenting, this may also change. This feeling and emotion might also change once again as he becomes able to express himself and his wants and his needs verbally more clearly, more evidently. When I have to do less of that emotional labour for him, I wonder how that's going to feel. Will I still try and do it? And then how will that make me feel about the historical figures that I look at? The women and men who have grown up children or teenagers or whatever else. So, yes, I think it's changed things, but at the same time, I don't ever want it to feel like I'm saying that people who aren't parents can't understand parents from history, if that makes sense. That was a very long-winded way of saying it, but it's quite a confusing and emotional experience. It's not something that's rooted in the practice of history, because it is purely emotion led, and it is something that I try desperately to counteract when I am talking about historical parents, because there are things that I read that make me cry, and to be fair, they've always made me cry because I am soft. But since having Gabriel, my tears are on a hair trigger, so I do have to be quite careful about some of the stuff that I talk about in videos to avoid just being a weeping mess. So yeah, maybe that answers your question. Were Shakespeare's plays done in contemporary dress? Do you think historical costumes help or hinder the telling of tales? And what if students saw live productions of Shakespeare before being challenged to read it alone or in class? Why do we introduce young readers to the text on the page when the original actors barely had a text on a page? So for the first part of that question, hopefully I have been able to find the image that I have in mind, and it will be on screen right now. This is an audience member's drawing of what they saw when they went to see Titus Andronicus. And what we can see happening here is there's a kind of hodgepodge of clothing happening. So we've got Tudorish early modern dress and weaponry mixed in with something that looks like it comes from an older historical past. There seems to be hints that we have Roman characters on stage. We also have Aaron the Moor on stage, and this character would, we believe, have been played by a white actor, almost certainly. So that means that this performer has been, in quote, blacked up. Whether that means they have been painted or they are wearing some form of mask and some kind of body covering to make them look as if they are black. So that's what's going on. That's an example of what the early modern performance might have looked like on the stage. So it's in both contemporary dress to the period, but it's also, in the case of this Roman play, hinting at something older. To your second question, do I think that contemporary productions in historical period dress are valuable? Yes, I do. I don't think it takes anything away from the staging of Shakespeare, and particularly if we're talking about original practice costuming, where we are using techniques to both manufacture the clothing and put them on that are historically appropriate to the best of our knowledge. I'm thinking about what the Globe was doing a few years ago, where they had all-male companies in original practice period dress. It was really interesting to see how these performers moved, how the costume changed the way they spoke, danced. Additionally, in cases where they were having weapons on stage, having period-appropriate weapons that they were wearing also altered the way that they moved and the way that the lines had to be delivered and from where. And I think that was really valuable for both the directors, the actors, and the audience. But is that the only way of doing Shakespeare, or indeed other early modern drama? No, absolutely not. I don't think these plays lose anything by being put in contemporary dress or 40s dress or futuristic dress. If the director's view is that they're going to set their play in a certain location or time and they're going to have the costuming and the props fit that, I think it absolutely works. I think, for example, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet works incredibly well. I think it's a brilliant way of introducing people to the text, and that doesn't require period appropriate costuming. So I think in the right hand, both work, and if they're done for the right reasons. As for your last two questions, I think that me explaining my viewpoints on this fully could potentially be a video on its own, but I'm going to try and answer it here because I think it is important, but I'm going to do so quickly, but also hopefully sensitively. That's the caveat for that. I have questions, possibly concerns, about why the work of William Shakespeare in my country is put on a pedestal when it comes to educating children. Why, according to the government's mandated national curriculum, it's Shakespeare that has to be studied. That doesn't happen for any other author, or indeed any other topic. It's also odd to me that that mandate is for Shakespeare to be taught in English literature rather than in theatre studies or drama. My impression would be, does it not make more sense that if we're going to mandate it as being part of a performance class rather than simply a text-based class? These pieces are meant to be performed. Also, if this is going to be the mandate and literature teachers are going to have to teach Shakespeare to everybody, then let's make sure that we are giving them the best chance and the best tools to do so. And I say this based on my own experience of having studied literature at university, because I chose to focus on early modern drama. I chose to focus on the literature of that period and its historical context. That's why I'm a literary historian. I went on from there to do those things. But I could have avoided all of it. Had I so decided, I could have made it that the only time I looked at a Shakespeare play was for 1 week in my first year. That would have been the only university level education I might have got on Shakespeare, and it was 1 week on Hamlet. I mean, I could have been sick that week, so I could have just done no Shakespeare at university, and then I'd turn up for a year of teacher training. How much Shakespeare is going to get fished into that? I mean, I haven't done teacher training, so I don't know, but I don't believe you're going to get 3 years worth, potentially, of education on early modern drama into somebody's head in a year's space when you're trying to train them to be a teacher. So then they do a year of teacher training and they get thrown into a school where they have to then teach Shakespeare to everybody at all levels. And it's more than one play. And this is going to go on for years. I just think that if it's going to be a government mandate, and if an accepted route to being an English teacher is to have done an English degree, then let's make sure that the universities are preparing those potential teachers as well as possible. That's my thoughts on the matter. I think that there is definitely some questions to be answered, both from higher education, the national curriculum, and the government that puts it in place and controls it. If you hadn't done your chosen emphasis, what other area of history would you like to have done? I think I probably would have gone in either direction. So I either would have been a medievalist, or I would have hopped over and become a Georgian specialist. I think those are, and possibly more towards the Georgians, and the whole period I find fascinating. This sort of cultural flux that's happening, the output, the caricatures, the work of people like Gilray. I just find that really fascinating, and also the sort of shifting social anxieties and questions of morality I just think is super fascinating. So I think that's probably where I would have gone if I hadn't been a Tudor Jacobean specialist. I'd love to know more about historical interpretation and the people you perform. Well, I would love to share more. I wonder if that's potentially a whole video on its own. I've often thought it'd be really cool to do almost like a vlog style video, get ready with me to go and portray this certain person and then meet the person that I'm portraying. In terms of the historical figures that I have portrayed or interpreted, they span from the medieval period all the way up to the 20th century. They have been highborn. I've played or portrayed queens. I've also portrayed criminals. And whether I have been Arbella Stewart or whether I have been interpreting as the river pirate Alice Wolfe or Alice Tankerfield, every single one of the people that I have portrayed has taught me something about themselves, about history, about what it's like to move in the world, the clothing, the landscape of that time. And it's been incredibly meaningful to me as an historian and a real valuable learning experience. And I'm incredibly grateful. And the fact that the world has opened back up, the fact that over the February half term, I got to be a court fool, a Marian court fool at Hampton Court Palace. And I was playing a woman who really existed. She was a tumbler called Lucretia, and interpreting her life and her experience, and then also being able to, in quotes, unpack what it means to be a fool, natural and artificial, etc., what the purpose is, and who these people might have been, and working with actually quite scant evidence was just such a joy. It's such a joy to be back doing it, and I can't wait to get the opportunity to do some more. Fingers crossed it happens soon, and maybe I'll be able to take you along with me if I get permission. But yeah, that's what I feel about interpretation, the people that I interpret as. Would you consider in the future going and visiting historical sites related to the Tudors, etc., similar to when you and Jamie went to Stratford-upon-Avon and we made that informative and humorous video about it? Thank you very much. Also, what are your top 5 historical sites in the UK? To answer your first question briefly, yes, I want to do that. The longer answer is I have plans. I have bought myself a gimbal for my phone so that I can walk around fabulous historical sites without creating shaky footage. I am also now currently figuring out how to work it. So I am upskilling to improve my content, and I'm also gradually buying more tech and equipment to make my content better, and then also figuring out how it works. On top of that, I am involved in some behind the scenes conversations with people at a number of historical sites in the hopes that they are going to permit me to come and film there. So I'm going to figure out good times to do it, figure out how I want to go about it. And so, in answer to your second question, I hope it's okay if I put a pin in it because there is nothing firmly agreed, and I don't want to potentially spoil some quite exciting surprises. So, I have, for a start, way more than 5 favourite historical sites. I'm privileged to work at a few of them, but I'm going to hold off on answering that question, and you're going to have to follow along on the channel and see which ones I end up going to. If you could choose to reincarnate as a historical figure, who would you choose to be? / if you could travel back in time to witness one historical event, what would it be? And what would your costume look like? Right, first and foremost, I would not want to reincarnate into the body of a historical figure under any circumstances. We are living in a world that is by no means perfect, but I firmly believe that today, now, is the best time to be alive, despite all of the potential issues and pitfalls that may be about to arise. This is the time that I want to be. Would I like to visit? Yes. Would I necessarily like to be seen? I don't know. It'd be ideal if I could be an invisible kind of fly on the wall. But in terms of whatever costume I'd wear, I would like to wear a costume that fits in with whatever situation I'm in, doesn't draw attention, and just lets me watch what's happening. And in terms of the events that I'd like to see, I would like to see the ones that solve the conundrums. So I would want to find out what happens to Amy Robsart / Amy Dudley on that day, what's going on there. I'd want to be hop back to be in the tower when the prince in the tower are living there, and then when they go missing, I want to find out what happens there. So those are the questions that I would like to answer to solve the historical crimes, I guess, or find out if crimes actually were committed. How do you feel about shows/movies overtly obscuring fact with fiction, given that many people will learn about history through these dramatisations? So I'm kind of conflicted and contrary when it comes to this question, because on the one hand, I absolutely love historical fiction. I completely see its place. I'm incredibly grateful for the way in which it can act as a gateway drug, so to speak, to get people into loving history, visiting historical sites, and just generally getting bitten with the fascination for history bug. You made a point about using fiction in place of fact, and that for me is where I potentially might draw the line. I always believe that the truth is stranger than fiction when it comes to historical people and events. And I think that there is so much available research, and there are so many good and well-researched consultants, that I do wonder why scriptwriters, directors, costume designers choose to do things that deviate from the known history. I think fiction, dialogue, dramatisation should fill the gap of the stuff we don't know. The stuff that historians call interpretation. That's where the fiction lives. Yes, create interesting conversations, create potential events that might explain why another knock-on event happens. But when we know that a certain thing happened on a certain date, I don't really understand why we would shift that. I mean, ignoring it is potentially annoying, but what's for me really confusing is why you just would completely change the known historical event. So that's where I sort of sit on it. Like, when we have the fact, let's use the fact, but there is definitely a massive place for fiction, and I think it's brilliant, and I love watching it. I probably should also honestly say that maybe part of the reason why I love watching it is to pause it and go, yeah, but that isn't how it happened. Yeah, but they wouldn't have dressed like that. There's a part of the know-it-all in me that really enjoys pausing historical fiction and just having a little rant. So for me, that's an added bonus. My mum wants to know where you got your bookshelves from, or if you built them yourself, because she loves how they go around the corner. Well, thank you very much to your mum. I got these from IKEA, and they are kind of modular, so you can have lots of different options about how they go together. There are some versions where you can have them narrower, you can have a desk in them, so they're pretty cool. And I can't remember for now what the name is on IKEA, but I will go and look it up, and it will be in the description box if your mum is interested in buying her very own set. And I did put them up all by myself, because one of my favourite things to do is flat pack. I find it incredibly meditative. Some people do Sudoku. Give me a good flat pack and I am a happy lady for the afternoon. If you could dine with 3 people from the past, one meal, all of you together, who would you choose? Just 3. That's really tough. I would have to pick Bess of Hardwick, because I would be fascinated to sit at a table with her. I'd like to have dinner with Catherine Parr as well. And probably going to have to, I mean, there's so many that I could pick, but the one that's jumping to mind is from a completely different time period, and that's Sylvia Pankhurst. Those 3 are who, for now, sit at my dinner table. Although, if you ask me in a week, it might change, and I want more than 3 next time. What made you decide to be a historical YouTuber? I think I probably touched a little bit on this in my video where I talked about my dyslexia diagnosis and how it arguably affected my life. I was diagnosed at the very start of my PhD, and I want to be very clear that the diagnosis didn't limit me or my aspirations or my perceptions of my opportunities in any way. If anything, I think it gave me the freedom to actually be honest with myself. to go, you love research, you love talking about history and literary history, material culture, art history. This is what you love. But what you absolutely hate is being confined and constrained to communicating that through the written word. And this is the reason why. It's not just because you're lazy, it's not that you've got to fight through. You have this neurodivergence that gives you these skills and makes this other thing really difficult, stressful, and frequently quite upsetting for you. And it's fine to own that. So then I had to think about how I was going to do what I wanted to do, how I was going to do the research and then communicate it in a way that felt meaningful to me. And YouTube was the answer. I watched a lot of YouTube. Principally, I watched the beauty gurus, actually. That's how I learned to do makeup, because I, first of all, learned to do makeup for the stage. So it didn't look very good in natural light because all I could do was stage makeup. So I learnt to do a full face of regular human makeup for being out in the streets and not on the stage from watching YouTube. And so I was already quite aware of the world and how it worked. And it just felt like a natural progression for me. And considering how it's turning out, I couldn't be more grateful that I made that choice. And equally, that you have all decided to come along with me. What is your degree in? What alma mater? And what inspired this passion? Now, I know that my love of history is definitely something that I've talked about before. I was bitten by the history bug when I was really small, and I credit my grandfather for that. My mum went back to work when I was 9 days old, so I was at home with my granddad until I started school, and he took me everywhere. The Whispering Gallery of St Paul's Cathedral, he took me to the Tower of London, he showed me books about history. I will clarify that not all of them were age appropriate for a child, because he taught me about the Tudors and World War II. And as a very small preschooler, he was teaching me about the beheading of Anne Boleyn, and also he was showing me graphic images about the crimes of the Third Reich. I'm not saying that's how you get your child interested in history, but it is definitely what bit me with the history bug. I went to Sussex University for my BA, MA and doctorate, so I was a lifer there. My BA was in English and Theatre Studies, or English and Drama. My MA was in Early Modern Literature and Culture, which is why I am a literary historian. And then my doctorate was in the same field. My PhD thesis title is Things Necessary and Unnecessary, Trash and Trifles in Early Modern England. And the area and scope of study, the things that I was using, so I look at corpus linguistic analysis, I look at art history, economic history, literary history, some cultural history, and some material history to talk about the notion of abjection. What was trash and trifles, what that means in this period, why it's being used as a term, and what it might tell us about the culture and concerns of the period. Could you tell more about the concept of Catherine and Henry Carey being Henry VIII's children by Mary Boleyn? How possible is this, and why it gained so much popularity? What we know about Henry's relationship to Mary Boleyn principally comes to us because it was mentioned in a dispensation. Henry applies for a dispensation to marry Anne Boleyn, and he needs to do this because he has had a sexual relationship with her sister Mary. At this time, remember, he is trying to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on account of the fact that she had been his brother's wife. That had created a prohibited degree of affinity, he says, that no pope can dispense against. Essentially, the marriage is incestuous, it shouldn't have existed. But by having slept with Mary, Henry has therefore set up a similar relationship between himself and Anne. It is arguably also incestuous. But for some reason, he is quite happy for a papal dispensation to be issued in account of that marriage. We know that Mary Boleyn at this time is married. Her married name is Mary Carey. So the children, Catherine and Henry, bear her married name. They are therefore attributed to her husband. Does this mean they are his children? Not necessarily. One thing we don't know is the span of Mary's relationship with Henry. We don't know when it begins, we don't know when it ends, we don't know if it coincides with her having these children, Catherine and Henry, or not. What is clear is Henry isn't claiming them. Now, we have to ask, if he's willing to claim Fitzroy a few years before, why won't he claim Catherine and Henry? Is it perhaps because he doesn't want a whole swathe of illegitimate children, or is it because they aren't his children? I lean towards it being the second, the latter of those, that they aren't his children and everyone knows it, but I don't have discernible proof or evidence to support that. It's just my feeling. And if other evidence comes out, as I was saying before, I am more than willing to change my assessment. As to why Henry fathering these children is something that has gained so much popularity in our current thinking, I believe that we can credit Philippa Gregory with that. Because, of course, it's a major plot point of The Other Boleyn Girl that Mary has had 2 children by Henry. It's necessary for the plot put forward by Philippa Gregory. And so I do think that's perhaps why this idea is so popular and believed to be so accurate by so many people today. Are there any non-European royal histories that you enjoy? Yes, there are lots. Currently, though, the one that I am focused on trying to figure out more about, trying to really deep dive, is the so-called Sultanate of Women. I am fascinated by these female figures in the harem, these wives and their mothers of sultans who occupy these incredible positions of power and influence from within this space. I want to find out even more about their backgrounds, where they came from, how they rose to the positions they ended up occupying. I just think it's totally fascinating. And certainly, once I get a better grip upon it, you can expect a video in that regard, possibly even a series of videos on the various women that are part of this Sultanate of Women. I'm nowhere near being ready to make that video now, but rest assured, I am working on it. Your son was born close to the birth of my first grandson, so I am curious to find out about your favourite family activities. Well, firstly, many congratulations and welcome to having a grandson. Welcome to grandparenthood. I hope you are loving every minute. So we try and tire him out as much as humanly possible with trips to the park, trips to the soft play, and on top of that, he does love going out to restaurants, but only pizza restaurants. Pizza is his favourite food. He asks for pizza every single day, so we have to limit his bread, cheese and tomato intake because otherwise he will just turn into pizza. But the payoff for that is for him that I am indoctrinating him into the ways of history and into history love by taking him to places like the Tower of London and Hampton Court. In fact, we were at Hampton Court for the Jubilee celebrations. We were there on the Friday and we saw a joust. So Gabriel's been to his first court joust and I am surprised to say that he absolutely loved it. I thought it was going to be a kind of toss-up, that either he was just not going to care and would try and eat the grass, or he was going to try and run under the barriers, get in the hooves of the horses and generally cause utter chaos. But he sat beautifully and he clapped along and he ate some picnic and he had a lovely time. And in fact, he was so well behaved that we managed to sit there for 2 jousts. And in between, he was running around just absolutely losing it, but he sat beautifully for the jousts. And we met up with my lovely friends and their son. And so he got to meet this he's a little bit older than Gabriel, and he was wonderful at looking after Gabriel. So Gabriel made a bigger friend who was just so sweet and took such good care of him. And the 2 of them were firm friends. So that's what we enjoy, particularly now the world's opening back up, is getting out and about, getting Gabriel on tubes, getting him into historic locations, making sure he has his requisite amount of pizza, and generally just trying to tire him out because he is a little inferno of energy and I know where he gets it from. So I only have myself to blame. Like, my genetics are strong in that child. He is willful and fearless. And I love that about him. And I hope he never grows out of it. are there any surviving examples of cloth of gold or cloths of silver? And yes, there are. The one that is jumping out in my mind is the Bacton Altar Cloth, which is a background of cloth of silver, I believe, with both gold and silver embroidery on it. I know I can find a picture of that, so I will be showing that now. And I will also leave a link to lots of information about the Bacton Altar Cloth so that you can find out more about what it was, where it was found, and what it is thought that it used to be once upon a time. Can you give us a bookshelf tour? Yes, I have seen this requested a lot and I definitely want to do it. What has taken the time for me is figuring out how I want to do it, because I'll be honest, the thought of filming a video just to camera like this has always felt a bit weird. Just me going book by book and be like, this is this book, and just listing them felt a bit weird. So I didn't really want to do it that way, but now I've had some experience of going live, and also now I've got the gimbal and I'm figuring out how to work that. I wonder if the way to go might be to do a bookshelf tour or a few bookshelf tours as part of lives, because that way I can show off the books, and then if there's something that catches people's interest, they can let me know in the comments and I can just talk about them a bit more and not talk about the ones that people either know about or aren't interested in. And with the discussion about doing more lives, which I'm very, very keen to do, I absolutely loved doing the live when I went to 100,000 subscribers, and sharing that and being part of a community while that happened was fabulous. I'm also waiting on my plaque to arrive, my 100,000 subscriber plaque. And so I thought I would unbox that as part of a live and have a conversation and celebrate the fact that that's arrived, because that's very exciting. But with a bookshelf tour and indeed future lives, I want to find a good time to do it. I'm very aware there's not going to be a perfect time. So I'm wondering if maybe if I put up a series of poll questions in my community tab, and maybe we try and narrow down weekdays, weekends, and then GMT times as to preferable times to go live. And maybe I can switch it about so that people who can't do one time will be able to do the other one. But I'm aware that we're all in different time zones, and so we'll just have to do the best we can. And of course, the lives will be available after the event. So that's a bigger answer for that question than just the question. But yes, bookshelf tour, hopefully in a live. What are the future plans for Monarchs Anonymous? Will the series continue with regular episodes or just occasional uploads? Well, firstly, I am so happy that this question was asked, because any opportunity that I get to talk about Monarchs Anonymous, I'm going to seize with both hands, because I am incredibly proud and just chuffed to bits that I was considered to be a part of this fabulous sitcom. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, what this question's about, I'm going to leave a link in a card up here and also a link in the description box to the Monarchs Anonymous YouTube channel. What it is it's an historical sitcom where I take the role of a modern day therapist who is putting various monarchs from history into group therapy with each other. We have 2 series on there and also some bonus episodes. In fact, the most recent bonus episode was a Jubilee celebration, which was put up a few days ago. And they are putting up a second part to that at least. So do make sure that you go and check out the channel. Make sure you are subscribed. If you like it, please share it around. Please also comment and like all the videos as well. And make sure you subscribe so that the next upload does get pushed out to you. In terms of what comes after the special episodes, I think the hope is that there will be another series at least. We all love making it. And the great thing with the Jubilee episode is that we introduced some new historical figures that haven't been in the series previously, and they all have a lot to say. So I think fingers crossed for another series, also potentially fingers crossed for a live show. When I have any update, rest assured I will be sharing it on all of my social media, and it will also be shared on the Monarchs Anonymous channel and their social media. So make sure you're following along to find out more. Where did Catherine of Aragon go after Henry VIII divorced her? Well, during the annulment process, as it's becoming clear that Catherine is not going to be seen as Henry's wife, he sends her away. She is in effect banished from court. First of all, she heads off to the moor in Hertfordshire. She's there for a little while, and then she is shifted around from various palaces, essentially trying to get her further and further away from Henry, and also keeping her separated from her daughter Mary. Essentially, she won't do what Henry wants her to do, so he does what he does to most people who won't do what he wants them to do. He places them somewhere they won't want to be, and then gradually increases the level of discomfort in the hopes that they will finally capitulate to what he wants. She spends the last part of her life at Kimbolton, and it's at Kimbolton that she dies. You mentioned in your video about Henry VIII's health theories, whether he had syphilis, etc., that Queen Elizabeth II would not allow the exhumation of any royal remains. I believe this includes the testing of remains of the princes in the Tower, but I would like to know, supposing the monarchy is abolished, hypothetically, and now we can study these things, who would you wish to study and what is it you would hope to have confirmed or disproved about them? First of all, the remains that are in Westminster Abbey that are marked as being the remains of the Prince in the Tower, there are questions about what they actually are and whom they actually are. 2 sets of human remains were found apparently at the foot of some stairs in the White Tower of the Tower of London, and at the time they were discovered, which was in the 1600s, they were identified as being 2 boys of the appropriate ages to be the Prince in the Tower had they died when they disappeared. Now, we can question all day, how good is forensic science in the Stuart period? How do we know that these bones are who they said they were? And there's no testing available at that time to figure out when these children died. Also, even if we did exhume them now, which we aren't going to be allowed to do, and then we tested them and found that there was a DNA match, we may be able to also date the bones as to a time period in which they died. So theoretically, we might be able to say that yes, these are the princes. But we may not necessarily be able to tell what killed them, whether it was foul play or not. The account is that those children were smothered. This length of time that's elapsed, I'm wondering if we would see any evidence of that on the skeletal remains. And if not, then what's the purpose, I suppose, of exhuming them? I think that forensic science has come a long way, but it still can't answer every question. There are things that simply aren't written into the bone. If somebody dies of the sweating sickness, for example, it almost certainly won't show markers on the bones. And I am a firm believer that all people, all sets of human remains, should have the expectation of being left to rest in peace. So I feel personally uncomfortable about exhuming remains that have been placed in an, in quotes, sanctified burial, and doing that simply to satisfy historic curiosity. With that being said, if I set aside any discomfort and think about what I might like to know from exhuming sets of human remains, it might be interesting if we could exhume Henry VIII to figure out what might have killed him. But then we are, of course, reliant on that cause of death being written onto the bone, which it may well not be. It would also potentially be interesting if we could to exhume the remains of Amy Dudley. So once again, this is going back to me wanting to solve a crime. I would be interested to see if the remains that are labelled as being the Prince in the Tower are in fact the Prince in the Tower, because it is potentially circumstantially telling that what we look like we have there is a surreptitious burial. The issue is that I'm willing to be corrected on this, don't believe that forensic science is to such a point that we can say for certain how old precisely they would have been when they died. So because of the crossover between the boys going missing and Henry VII taking up the throne from Richard III after the Battle of Bosworth, I'm not sure if forensic science could narrow it down sufficiently that we would know if these boys, if they were determined to be the Prince in the Tower, died in their uncle's reign or in Henry VII's reign. It's possible that forensic science is that good, but I don't believe it is. And so if that's the case, if we can't tell exactly who was king when they died, and we can't necessarily tell what killed them, then I do wonder what that might teach us, except for the fact that these two boys were the Prince in the Tower and they were surreptitiously buried, which in itself is fairly suspicious, but it doesn't necessarily exonerate or indeed show somebody to be guilty. So I'm going to make this next question the last question, because you might hear that I'm starting to get a little bit hoarse again. My voice still isn't where it needs to be. The pollen count's really high. So whatever made me sick, I'm now also being affected by the heat and the pollen. I just keep losing my voice. It keeps going weak. It's very frustrating. So last but by no means least, and as I said, I'm very happy to do another one of these videos. I've really enjoyed answering your questions. Final question though is, what do I do for a living? Well, I do YouTube, but I also work in heritage locations as an educator, and also less frequently currently, because we aren't doing quite so much work in that regard. It's mostly only school holidays, as a historic interpreter. So I'm either leading school groups, GCSE, A-level, and in some sites, university groups around, teaching about the site and about certain periods of history that connect to the various sites, or I am in costume and I am interpreting as an individual from history. So that's the way that I earn my money, and that's how I make my living. Thank you to everybody who asked a question, and thank you to all of you for watching along. As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. Or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. So do follow me over on some or all of them so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. And if you did, why not share it with some friends? But please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, and I am going to ask once again that you check that you're subscribed if you think you are and you want to be, to make sure that YouTube has not unsubscribed you against your will. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not also hit the little bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button, and then also select all in the drop down menu that will appear so that YouTube will tell you when I next upload. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.